Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. Tell me, it sounds like you're maybe starting a second career as a educational travel organizer and trip executioner.
Yeah, I did it once.
Okay. Well, so tell me about this field trip.
Field trips were good. We had a couple of different things. We had like a staycation, if you will. I got grant funding from our local school district's funding opportunity to do a virtual tour of Auschwitz from afar.
That's very cool.
So we got to do a 2-hour tour in our library.
I heard
About 70 kids.
Yeah, I heard your front office got a call from Poland from Auschwitz, and they were suddenly
We had some scheduling issues.
As the time changed.
Which does occur when you're dealing with Poland.
International education.
Yeah, it's not Poland's fault.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we got a phone call from Poland. Long story short, they're wonderful. Really great opportunity for anyone interested in doing this type of thing with their students. I would love to talk to you about it.
So wait, just run me through what exactly was that event?
So I actually saw guides doing this when I was in Poland.
Okay.
And so part of my program, when I went in the summer of 2025, talked about this opportunity, which is you set up basically like a Zoom time with a guide at Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's a 2-hour tour. They do about a 45-minute tour of Auschwitz 1. Here's a break. And then they do about a 45-minute tour of Auschwitz 2.
Interesting.
And then you can ask questions.
Like a virtual tour?
Yeah.
Did they take a camera with them or something?
Yes.
Interesting.
And he can I think he's basically wearing, what are those things called? Like a
GoPro or something?
It's like a gimbal. A gimbal. There we go.
For smoothness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it kind of looks like one of those that they're wearing so they can flip the camera back and forth. But when you joined it, it had like a woman from the office and a tech person and our tour guide and us. So
it's a pretty sophisticated setup.
It was very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot more supported than I expected in the moment. I expected there to be some back and forth of technology, just like the stress of doing a live tour outside in Poland and then, it connecting to us in Ohio. But they would like overlay like videos and drone footage and interviews and things like that.
Huh.
And he would be like, our guide, Jonathan, would be like, I'm being told that this video isn't loading. And so like he was getting feedback from the tech people.
It's like a whole live multimedia experience.
It really was. And it was very like scripted, you could tell, because he would like finish a phrase and they would start a clip.
Interesting.
And so it gave him
kind of like a live theater production.
It basically
almost,
was.
But also a walking tour.
So much more than I thought it was going to be. Like I was excited for it. This level of production was incredible. So worth I would pay for it out of my own pocket today if I got to.
And just some background, you're in the middle of your Holocaust education unit right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So me, my co-teacher, and then another English teacher, we were all kind of either just wrapping up or kind of building up into our Holocaust units. So we had the virtual tour was mostly 10th, 11th, and 12th graders.
Okay. And then what did you do?
They really enjoyed it. They liked asking questions. He was very responsive. And so it was a really great opportunity. And it was a beautiful day in Poland. So that was really interesting for the kids to see, like just how beautiful it really is there.
Yeah.
And so that was last week, which was building towards another great opportunity where we got the funding to take 120-ish students and I think ending up with about 14 adults to Cincinnati to view the Auschwitz exhibit at Cincinnati Museum Center. And we are recording this as soon as I got home from that. So I had a very long day.
You're very fresh off of the tour bus.
Yeah, I spent more time on the tour bus than I did at the place, but it was worth it.
You're tired of hearing your name today.
I did at one point say I would like another name.
Okay.
There were just some days in teaching where you hate your own name. Today was one of those.
Okay.
And it was just the navigation of everything. So the kids were great. The adults that went with us really enjoyed it. And It was a lot of work, but it was very worth it. It's been good to kind of push ourselves to do some of these things. This is all very out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, it's been fun to hear you kind of learn about navigating this sort of educational experience.
Yeah, and I'm excited to just go back to teaching. I'm excited to not be like tour guide Barbie. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, I'm excited to not be... I'm always just dealing with an invoice. I'm always grabbing a check. My secretaries do everything for me, and all I'm doing is like connecting dots, but I still feel tired by that.
It's a different kind of work from classroom teaching, for
sure. And
it
makes teaching look easy.
Yeah.
Like today, the bus driver came up and he's like, "Do you have my check?" I was like, "Yeah, you need that. That's on me." I just totally was like, "I'm getting on a bus," and he
Money
was like,
makes the world go round.
"You're gonna pay me." And I was like, "You're right." So
interesting.
very busy few days. We've been planning this trip since October.
It's fun to see it pay off.
It is fun to see it pay off. I am relieved at how well it went. I am thrilled with what the kids got to see and experience.
Well, I know you worked really hard to organize it and make it possible.
Thanks.
So it's good to see you.
I'm ready
having some payoff.
Yeah, it is. And now I'm ready for a nap. And I'm not going to plan any field trips for a little bit. I need a little break.
All right. Well, we will get through this and get you to nap time as quickly as possible. Before we get there, do want to just remind our listeners, go ahead and sign up for the 16 to 1 podcast email newsletter to get the latest updates, episode announcements, resources, and workshop offerings from Moonbeam Multimedia. That is us. And if there's a story in your local educational community that you think we should cover, we'd love to hear about it. Please contact us using our website or write at hello@16to1.com. This week, I wanted to talk about the way back roots of the system that you know and love as high school.
Love is a big word.
Okay.
That was a strong
the
choice.
The system you know and care strongly about.
Oh, okay. That's what I meant.
Okay. High school.
Boo.
If you've ever wondered in the United States, you haven't? Okay. Well, for those of you who may have wondered.
I would like to have fewer thoughts, please.
Okay.
No thoughts.
Less wondering.
Chelsea said, if you've ever wondered, I haven't.
I have.
I'm actually done thinking. I've learned too much. I tell you all the time, I'd like to know less.
If you've ever wondered who you could either praise or blame for the system known as high school, the one that dictates what percentage of your waking hours?
Boo.
A large percentage. Okay.
I'm back to booing.
If you've ever wondered about the general shape of high school and the experience of it in the United States, there is a sort of origin point for that discussion.
There are people to blame.
There are people to blame.
Let's put it bluntly.
Here's the list. Okay.
Number 1.
The Committee of 10 could be a good place to start. The Committee of 10 is an 1892 working group of the National Education Association.
The NEA.
Yeah, the NEA. We've done a podcast episode on the NEA, on the major professional organizations for educators in the United States. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out episode 40 of our show. But the National Education Association of the United States Committee on Secondary School Studies.
Do you want to know who's in charge of this event?
I would love to know who to blame or praise.
Okay, so this Committee of 10 was chaired by the president of Harvard, and his name was Charles W. Eliot. And this group was made up mostly of college presidents. There were some high school principals and headmasters that were included, some other educational professionals, but a lot of people from higher ed were represented in this group of 10 and on their committee.
Their conferences, yeah.
So the group was tasked with rethinking the high school experience from top to bottom, and their conference topic was this: uniformity in school programs and requirements for admission to college. And the goal was the standardizing of the school experience for anyone between the ages of 6 and 18.
Yeah, there were more than 90 educational leaders who got pulled into this group. They formed a bunch of different subcommittees on academic subjects, and they were organized around 11 key questions. I'm not going to read them all, but they included stuff like, how much time should we spend on instruction in a given week? What topics should be taught and when? Like, what's the sequencing? Should we differentiate based on whether a student is headed to college or professional school or neither? What's the best method of teaching subjects generally agreed upon in the conference? And then they also asked about what are the best methods of assessing all of these subjects particularly for the purpose of college admission.
Can you think of just 10 people who should have opinions about all of these things?
Well, it's funny that you ask that. They do publish this report. Tell me before we get into that question deeply.
They're fans of themselves.
Okay. Yeah, I remember reading some of this to you and you were like, "Ooh, the tone."
Yeah. The published report, which the edition that we were reading for this came out in 1894. And this is what the preface reads. This is the quote. The report of the Committee of 10 on Secondary School Studies is now generally known among the leading educators of the country, and while there's much diversity of opinion respecting many of its recommendations, there is substantial agreement that it is the most important educational document ever issued in the United States. Can you imagine writing that about your own homework? Like, that's what these guys did. They're like, let's have a meeting, and we're going to talk about any topic that might appear.
Right.
Ranging from astronomy to geology to botany. And including a ton of other languages and everything else. And then we're going to say, you know what? We did some pretty good work here. And we think this text is really important.
Yeah, this is sort of like you going to like a big conference and you all just decide that you're going to have meetings and then publish a playbook for every single public school in the country to follow.
Right. And like, not that the president of Harvard at their time can't have a valuable opinion that might be worth hearing, but I just can't imagine what the president of Harvard could have impactful to say about the education of a 6-year-old at the moment.
They do. It's funny how much of the committee recommendations point to things that should happen before high school. They were convened about high school. They spent so much time talking about not high school in their conferences. It was fascinating.
I am someone who very quickly is like, not my monkeys, not my circus. These people were like, actually,
well, I have heard you say
we could have more of a circus.
Sure.
A few more monkeys won't hurt.
I have heard you say, though, how important it is for your work that prior to your students reaching you, they are adequately prepared for whatever it is you're taking on in your class. Right.
But I would never go tell them at what ages is the most appropriate.
You're saying, please do it, but I won't tell you how to do it.
I would love to say, please have this skill. I'll let you decide when it most fits.
Well, this is very interesting.
Academically.
No, this is very interesting for me to hear because you're kind of resisting. This is the process of peeling back the layers of the formalization of education as a profession. Well, before we get into it, let me just say, this does sound pretty boastful, but I did find other indications in other reports.
It was
kind of
work.
Shortly after the time. Yeah, that it sounds like it really was a pretty impactful document, though the extent to which any of its recommendations were followed is kind of a question.
I guess for me, maybe I'm coming from the place of like, did Abraham Lincoln say that the Gettysburg Address was the best thing he'd ever written?
Okay.
And like,
so your issue is one of attitude, and demeanor.
I also want to give something enough
humility,
life to breathe.
Okay.
To see how it fares on its own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fair enough. As we get into this, I'm going to pick your brain about this. I want you to be thinking about what sort of project this is, what sort of problem this conference is solving, and whose interests are represented in the
white men
in the proposed solutions. And then also, what does it say about the organization of power and educational policy at this time in American schooling? And also just like, are we at a point where we need to have another conference of 10? This was for a precise moment in American history. Mm-hmm. There's this radical economic transformation. Industrialization is happening. We're starting to think of the end of the war. We're starting to think of school not just as a place like a holding container for children whose parents have to go work in factories, although also that.
And we're seeing the rise of college attendance.
Yeah.
That sort of is playing a big factor in this, I would say. So
yes,
there's a lot going on in the United States at this time.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the NEA, its work, and whose voices were being included at this time?
Well, you're not going to like all of this.
Oh, okay.
But it'll get better.
Okay. Chin up.
So the NEA actually got that name, the National Education Association, in 1870.
Yes.
It originally started in 1857, and it was called the National Teachers Association. Their goal was to, quote, unite to advance the dignity, respectability, and usefulness of their calling
Okay.
as teachers.
So like many professional
into
organizations,
that.
they're trying to
That's a good bumper sticker.
get organized.
I would like to bring this back.
Okay.
The NEA did denounce slavery in 1865 and were very like, if a state is not willing to accept this, this, and this, then we should not.
On the NEA website, I think I remember them saying if any Confederate, basically any state seceding from the Union, they weren't interested in allowing those states to be members of the organization unless they provided common school opportunities for Black students.
Exactly. The American Civil War is from 1861 to 1865. So following the Civil War, part of what the U.S. is dealing with is that both public schools and private academies are now all trying to figure out how to best shape an education that is preparing students for colleges. There's a discrepancy in their goals and their skills and things like that. And so that's what actually kind of like spurred this conversation of the Committee of 10, was to start talking about the ways that learners are coming to them, what they're coming in with, some baseline, some expectations, some hopes for their learners. And that's kind of where this all comes together.
And there's also definitely an internal struggle, I'll say, even within the committee about how much that overriding looming goal or force in American education of college should dictate the content of the high school curriculum. We also have this evolving chaos of different experiences state by state in the United States. We did see some push toward standardization, starting with Horace Mann, and the sort of pre-Civil War push toward the common school movement. You can learn about that in episode 60 of this show, where we talked about Horace Mann. But the virtues that this common school movement wants to instill are very present in the conversations of the Committee of 10. So this is just kind of another question I have about this, is like, when we're making these choices about standardization in a country as big and diverse as the U.S., what are the rough edges that we are smoothing out?
That's a good question.
The output, lots of discussion on each subject or collection of subjects. That's each of the conferences they met. There were I think there were 10 educators in each conference and 9 conferences. They came up with these big tables of course offerings that described when courses should be offered, in what sequence, how many subdivisions per week. It can get into nitty-gritty details. Some of the committees went into more detail than others on certain things, which was interesting, but we also got recommendations for how
it always works in a group project, isn't
True.
it?
Yeah. We also saw recommendations for how to teach and assess certain subjects. Some conferences were more prescriptive than others on these fronts. The big consequences that fell out of this thing. Some of these are going to sound really familiar because they haven't changed very much. Some of them run totally contrary to the best practices we now might think are important. But here are some of the big points that they walked away with. This first one I thought was so interesting. I'm going to read a kind of longish quote from the report of the Committee of 10, because this is the one where they're like, basically, let's get rid of differentiation, which I thought was a bit shocking. So here we go. Quote, "The secondary schools of the United States taken as a whole do not exist for the purpose of preparing boys and girls for colleges. Only an insignificant percentage of the graduates of these schools go to colleges or scientific schools. Their main function is to prepare for the duties of life, that small proportion of all the children in the country, a proportion small in number but very important to the welfare of the nation, who show themselves able to profit by an education prolonged to the 18th year, and whose parents are able to support them while they remain so long at school. There are, to be sure, a few private or endowed secondary schools in the country which make it their principal object to prepare students for the colleges and universities, but the number of these schools is relatively small. A secondary program intended for national use must therefore be made for those children whose education is not to be pursued beyond the secondary school. The preparation of a few pupils for college or scientific school should in the ordinary secondary school be the incidental and not the principal object." End quote. So this is a bunch of college educators deciding that the purpose of secondary school is not primarily college preparation.
Is that just a reflection of them not getting students of the ability that they're hoping for? Do you think that's just them being like, yeah, maybe the caliber of students isn't accurately reflecting the education that we believe is?
I mean, I think there's a little more to it than that. It sounds like they're saying we want to cast a wide net and catch the the academic cream of the crop for that population, but
Sure.
that to me, and we'll see as we go through some of these other recommendations, it seems like they really are concerned with the preparation of a human being for something other than academic features.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. It seems a little bit like you're chewing off your own foot in some ways.
If you work in college admissions, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that's all.
What else did they recommend?
Oh, they had some interesting thoughts. Okay, so here's a few others of the highlights. They believe that teachers should be more highly trained and that education is a profession that requires unique training and specialized study, which I agree with.
Prior to this, they might just be like, okay, can you read? Can you do basic arithmetic?
Sure.
Okay, you have the skills to teach.
Another one of their beliefs was that, and we kind of already mentioned this, was that they wanted instruction in their domain to begin at a younger age than what had like most commonly been done. So they had opinions on what should be happening in primary schools or elementary schools or leading up to just.
I remember reading somebody was surprised a little bit that some of the committees didn't recommend that more time was spent on their domain. They weren't advocating for overall a bigger slice of the instructional pie. They were just saying, please start sooner.
Interesting.
Start them younger on whatever this thing is.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Latin teachers specifically recommended against, quote, the common practice of putting the teaching of beginners into the hands of the youngest teachers who have the slenderest equipment of knowledge and experience. End quote.
End quote.
Slenderest.
The slenderest equipment. What rang through my head when I read this was familiar criticisms of Teach for America.
Interesting.
Which is a program that puts very brand new, very inexperienced educators in very difficult educational environments. Yeah. At least at this time. And for these purposes, they're saying, don't do that. Okay.
They believe that a modern language ought to be included in the course of study starting around age 10.
French or German in this case.
This should be younger.
Now we know we think this should be younger.
100% it should be younger. We know that 10 is not too old to start learning for sure, but it's much easier the younger you are. Another one, geometry shouldn't be just about reproducing proofs from a book, but also about constructing new proofs or novel applications of old principles. I agree with this. They also believed in working towards the uniformity of requirements for admission to colleges.
Yeah.
This one I have opinions on.
Oh, okay.
The best teacher in each department should spend time teaching others how to do it better.
Do it better. What are your opinions about this?
I have opinions.
This is like mentoring, basically, right?
I do agree with that.
Uh-huh.
But there's some problematic language going on there. I also, it is not on the mentor to do all of this. I think it is important for mentors to be accessible and available and share. But that's a lot of pressure on one person to feel like...
Are you feeling this pressure as the senior most member of your department?
God, no, because I work with really brilliant people. Thank the Lord. I have such an incredible department. But I do get some cracks about being the oldest. Longest serving.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I'm 35.
Okay.
So that's kind of hilarious to me that I've already reached this point because my mentor didn't hit it until about 5 years before she retired.
Uh-huh.
But I think there's something valuable, obviously, in learning from good teaching. But I hate that the pressure is on the best teacher because I think that's such a problematic
That's interesting that you think of that as pressure on you. I mean, I definitely would think of it as responsibility.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Don't
you get to the point where you're senior enough and you think that you actually do have something worthwhile to kind of like pass on to your more junior coworkers about, I don't know. I feel like I hear you talking a lot about
Terry was never
classroom.
Like that. Like Terry was always so excited to learn from us and to be part of it and to...
Yeah.
Also, like, who's to say that just because you've been doing it the longest makes you the best?
For what it's worth, they do not define like who the best teacher is in this little passage.
I do wonder who decides who is best. I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself causes strife. In my department, we have strengths and some of us have things we don't do as well as others. And I don't think that makes any of us the best of all four of us or the five of us with my co-teacher. But I do think it means that I can go to whomever and say, look, this is something I think you're really good at, And so...
Yeah.
But I definitely have a problem with just being like the best teacher in each department has to do it. Because like the best teacher in each department doesn't need more work.
That's actually one of the lingering questions I did have about this is, do some of the organizing questions of this conference, which include something like what's the best way of teaching X or Y, or what's the best way of assessing X or Y, do those questions contain too many assumptions in them? I think it's pretty clear from the many hours of conversation we've had on this podcast that there is not a singular best way to answer any given question in the classroom when it comes to instruction.
And I don't think people like putting people on pedestals is the best way to learn from them either. And that's just kind of my own.
Yeah, fair.
That's been my experience so far.
Real quickly, I just found another original source I thought was kind of fun. It's called 10 Years Influence of the Report of the Committee of 10.
More tens.
Lots of tens by a man named Edwin G. Dexter, who was the director at the School of Education at the University of Illinois. And he asked questions like, to what extent were the report's recommendations implemented? What's been the influence of this Committee of 10?
That was one of my questions.
Yeah.
What is their influence and what do they represent?
10 years on is not necessarily a huge amount of time to do a retrospective, but what he found was kind of a mixed bag in general. He didn't think the report had an outsized impact on sort of the shape of high school in American education.
Did he have beef with one of the 10?
No, I don't think so. It was pretty general, but he did like a sort of statistical analysis, like, okay, if they recommended that we have this much more of Latin from this age to this age, how many more hours of instruction across the board of these schools did,
Interesting.
And he's like, well, they kind of took some of these recommendations, but not all of them. It's sort of hard to attribute these changes directly to this report because of other things going on and changes in the education system. So he was like, this is definitely a very significant thing in that everybody in education was and is still talking about it. But in terms of direct consequences to the timeline and implementation in high schools, maybe not quite as impactful as the report's authors might want us to believe.
Or maybe as they had so strongly asserted about themselves.
Quite strong. There are some impacts that linger from this. The concept of the standardized college entrance exam.
Interesting.
That's huge now in American, in higher ed. This thought of a commonly accepted batch of coursework that serves as a foundation for testing and admission. AP tests and SATs and ACTs, all these things that are now just everywhere. This was really the prototypical beginnings of that. There's also this 1918 report of another committee convened by the NEA I thought was fascinating as a kind of counterpoint to this. It's called Cardinal Principles of Secondary Education. This is where they're trying to get at, okay, what's the point of all of these courses of instruction? It sounds like it's coming from a different world from the one articulated by the membership of the Committee of 10. They say, here are the cardinal principles of high school. Health, command of fundamental processes, worthy home membership, vocation, civic education, worthy use of leisure, and ethical character. It's about your soul, like the eternal status of your soul, basically.
The eternal status of your soul, not my soul and my worthy home membership.
And there's some people who sort of saw this as like a point-counterpoint conversation to say, hey, we might have lost track of some things here. The whole point of all of this. We lost the thread. Yeah, like, okay, it's nice if you start your course of Latin at age 10 or whatever, but we have to remember that the whole point of this is to create human beings who are pleasant to be around and productive members of society and morally upstanding human beings. Interesting dialogue.
No pressure, though.
No pressure.
Zero pressure on all fronts.
And then just one final thing. This ties directly to our very recent Carnegie Libraries conversation, but we talked a little bit about the Carnegie Foundation. The Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching was founded in 1905. This was an organization originally dedicated, they were designed to function as an educator pension program. Andrew Carnegie was like, we got to do something about these teachers. They need pensions. He started this thing. It was eventually spun off into TIAA-CREF. They came up with, at the time, this thing called the Carnegie Unit, which is 120 hours of classroom contact time. And they sort of followed the general outline of the recommendations from the Committee of 10 to come up with that number
To create
to constitute a course for credit in high schools.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So that came from somewhere, and now you know where.
It came from somewhere, okay, yeah.
This committee advocated essentially for the end of differentiation. It's pretty bold in their writing. This like sort of college versus scientific school versus neither different demographics of students. This was reported as being unanimously agreed upon by all of the conferences. And they said, well, maybe not all of our members fully agreed to everything, but for every vote that we took, these were unanimous votes.
This is where, yeah.
So what is the goal of this type of uniformity of instruction in public education? Now we look and see it's very clear that not every learner receives the same kind of instruction equally well.
Yeah. It seems as though they're coming from a place of being like, this is exactly what we want every learner to be and to possess. And not that I have a problem with having standards, but I do have a problem with their inability to see other strengths. And I don't think it's giving any room to people that maybe don't meet like the eye test of, you know, X, X, and X. So that I do think is a loss for sure. I'm sure they lost out on a lot of really great opportunities with people by being this limiting and by acting as if everyone could do the exact same thing in the exact same way in the exact same time. But, you know, that's coming from a place now where it's like, I couldn't do enough differentiation if I tried. Like, there's just not enough time in the day.
We've maxed out in the other direction of differentiation.
And I think we've probably gone a little bit too far, maybe in some way. I do wonder if sometimes we've gone too far off to say, well, no, isn't it okay to say that this is the expectation for a 10th grade student or something like that?
I think the other thing here is that we've decided that differentiation is important, but we haven't decided that appropriately staffing for differentiation is important.
I'm also just kind of in my head going through it and trying to tell myself that part of the reason for their limitations is because of they don't know what's to come. They don't know what people will be and how communities and the country and things like that will shift. And so I think it's not coming from a place of like growth mindset at all. It's coming from a place of this is our world. Let's create people for this world. They will do this, this, and this. Whereas like today when I talk to my students, I'm like, I literally can't even tell you about some of the jobs you could do someday because I can't fathom them. And so I think it's a little bit short-sighted in some ways to not see the growth and opportunity and things like that.
Along those same lines, what do you think this committee or the report thinks of as being the purpose of education? And I'll sort of clue in a little bit with some of these passages. Each of the conferences some of them had direct commentary on this. The English teachers, for example, they said that the main direct objects of the teaching of English in schools seem to be two. One, to enable the pupil to understand the expressed thoughts of others and to give expression to thoughts of his own. And two, to cultivate a taste for reading, to give the pupil some acquaintance with good literature, and to furnish him with the means of extending that acquaintance.
I don't hate that.
No, I think it's good. And I
don't hate that at all.
A couple of the other groups, especially when it came to earlier grades, were talking about the importance of cultivating interest.
Yeah.
You've talked a lot about that because interest and curiosity is so key to motivated learning, and it's so
I would say
difficult.
It's one of the biggest indicators of success.
Yeah,
for sure.
The history conference said that the principal end of all education is training. In this respect, history has a value different from, but in no way inferior to, that of language, mathematics, and science. The mind is chiefly developed in three ways: by cultivating the powers of discriminating observation, by strengthening the logical faculty of following an argument from point to point, and by improving the process of comparison, that is, the judgment. Studies in language and in the natural sciences are best adapted to cultivate the habits of observation, as mathematics are the traditional training of the reasoning faculties, so history and its allied branches are better adapted than any other studies to promote the invaluable mental power which we call the judgment.
Gosh, I wish that was still it. I love that.
Yeah.
Am I on their side? Dang. I think that sometimes when like people learn enough to shift their own views, that sometimes it's just like, well, so and so told you to believe this and you did. And like all of the focus is not on the event that caused a shift, right? It's just like, and I guess what I'm thinking about is like how teachers get accused of like brainwashing and stuff like that. And it's like, well, no, like some of this is just learning. When you know better, like, do better, right? At what point can we just say, like, oh, I just changed my mind because I updated my knowledge, you know? But like right now, it's weaponized.
Well, it just makes you wonder what people think the educational process is.
Yeah, and it just rewards like the static nature of it because it's like, this is my thought forever. It will never adjust and evolve.
There was a really funny comment from the history conference, I'm pretty sure, about rote memorization being less important. And they're like, this is no more remarkable than the dude who, for whatever reason, could remember everything he'd ever had for dinner for his like entire life or something. They're like
that's enough.
Yeah, they're like, memorizing factoids out of textbooks is not historical learning. That's not your ability to transform the events of history with your judgment into context.
Right.
You know?
Well, and like this is something I deal with especially my seniors in composition, because they take reading quizzes with some frequency. They'll say things like, hurry up and pass out the quiz because I'm going to forget. And I'm like, so you don't know it. And they're stunned by that. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, if your success on this quiz is based on my timeliness and passing it out, you don't know this.
True.
You have a memory that's working at the moment. And if too much happens
Short-term
between
memory.
now and then, it will be gone. And then it will be my fault that I didn't pass out your quiz quick enough. And then they're like, oh. And they don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I'm hearing. Anyways.
Let me ask you, if you think this committee and its work was an appropriate response to the Industrial Revolution, which is a good question in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the right response to everyone going to work in factories? What do you think a committee like this today would do in response to the information revolution or mass communication or AI? What are the demands of the Committee of 10 today?
I mean, my fear is that they would be like, we should all be using AI.
Why? Because higher ed has been co-opted by the technocracy.
Right.
I do think that this represents what's happening now is a completely different partnership in terms of who is controlling dollars and curricula in higher ed. And it does make me wonder how much of that kind of thinking, that driving toward corporate productivity would shift and change the nature of the reflections from subcommittees like this.
I mean, even for all of my concerns with this Committee of 10, I do think that they valued learning mostly.
For its own sake.
And that's what I would see being lost as a response to AI or something like that. Because in my experience with the training I've received in AI and the ways I've been encouraged to use AI, it's eliminating the brain of everything. And that's a worry for me. So like,
I can see it, for example, turning education into an instrumental practice rather than one that you do for its own sake because it makes you a better human being.
Yeah, that's my fear. I would hate to lose any more thought. And that's what I fear we're losing. And so I think that in this current day, if the Committee of 10 were to resurrect itself and appear, that would worry me.
I feel like there's this kind of fundamental optimism with this report.
Yeah. That
with
there wouldn't be today.
Right. With respect to like growth and change and where we can go. I don't hear a lot of that kind of optimism. And I guess that's what I would love to hear from today's Committee of 10. I would love to hear an optimistic vision of the future that still responds to the challenges of digital literacy, mass communication, this kind of stuff. We're not there.
And I do think there's value in the technology aspect, obviously, but I wouldn't want a new Committee of 10 to focus too much on whatever the goals of AI are and that becoming too ubiquitous, maybe.
Yeah, a good kind of warning for our future.
I think so. Can you tell I taught 1984 this year? That's what I keep thinking of.
Big bro's watching you.
I'm definitely going that way. You're rubbing off on me, I fear. My tin hat is growing larger and larger.
This is a segment where we talk about what we have learned in the last couple of weeks.
What have you been up to? What have you been learning about?
I've been learning that I'm still capable of joy. How about that? I'm enjoying some new music. Harry Styles' new album came out.
Oh my gosh, so
I learned
good.
about that. I listened to all of the music. They're bops. It's very synth heavy. I like the synths and drum machines. It's very energizing at this time. I feel like it's a good, like, we're ending winter, we're getting into spring and summer. It's a nice kind of little pick me up. That's what I kind of just took a mental break and spent a lot of my downtime simply enjoying new music.
Vibing.
Yeah. What about you?
You know what? I'm going to be a nerd real quick.
Please do.
One of my favorite video games of all time just came out with like its second release.
Okay.
A new version, if you will.
A sequel.
That's the word.
There you go.
It's the second one of its... the second of its name.
The same thing, but different.
And newer.
But it's not the same.
I've been playing Slay the Spire for probably a couple of years now. Love the game, love the vibes, all of it. And the second one just came out. And I'm going to use you for what I learned.
Okay.
Which is I've actually been teaching you how to play Slay the Spire in some ways. And I've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed sharing it with you. I've enjoyed the sequel.
The sequel has a multiplayer mode, which was not the case for the first one.
And it's done a good job of keeping what I loved about it. So I've just been enjoying this. And it's been good for me. I feel like I've learned other things, but I'm just going to stick with this.
No, that's okay. Sometimes you just got to learn to relax.
Yeah, so it's been nice to have that as an escape.
Cool. Anything else?
I don't think so. I'm going to stop talking about the weather because it snowed again today and I'm unwell about that. So you know what?
The guy who dropped off our mower this morning told me we're getting all 4 seasons in one day today.
It's going to be like 70 degrees tomorrow. So that's probably why I like have half a headache is because of this.
Yep.
So
yep. Stay healthy, teachers.
Yeah, stay healthy. And we'll be back in 2 weeks.
I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hello, listeners, and thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of 16 to 1. This show is produced by a 2-woman team, your co-hosts Katie Day, our lead researcher and social media manager, and Chelsea Adams, that's me. I edit and produce the show, and I also make the music you hear in our episodes. Visit our website at 16to1.com for show notes and resources, or to get in touch with us. 16 to 1 is sponsored by Moonbeam Multimedia, a firm that partners with civic innovators, educators, and mission-driven organizations to help create stronger communities.
Stage 5 clinger right now. This is egregious. She says, a little purr.